Hi, my name is Skylar Stasney and welcome to Curiosities of Copshaholm. So today we're going to be talking about the sunken gardens that I'm standing in right now. The sunken garden originally didn't all look like this, or it wasn't originally even here when J.D. Oliver and his family bought the land that the house is on. He didn't own all of this land until after 1899, and that's when all of this was developed. But before that, there wasn't a lot of planting around the area. There was some in the rockery on the east side of the mansion with some tropical plants, and then there were cold frames and vegetable gardens in the area also, but that was about it. They didn't really start adding and designing the sunken garden that we see now until a second period of development in 1906. So from 1906 to about 1927, there was a different design than what we see now, and it was designed by a woman named Alice Neal, and she's responsible for the design of the sunken garden and what it looked like initially. So during that second period of design by Alice Neal, she designed the sunken gardens and then also added the pergola. Originally the pergola wasn't here, there just used to be a wall at the end of the porte cochere. So the pergola now has all of these grapevines on it, but originally there was ivy that grew up the sides of the pergola, similar to what used to be on the fountain house. And during this period of design, it was more of an Edwardian style, so it was more clean cut and there was less overgrowth. So things were kept really short and clean cut. And this was also the idea of having an outdoor space. Before 1908, people didn't really have outdoor spaces like this. So this was kind of seen as an extension of the home, like a set of outdoor rooms, since sometimes your house would be way hotter inside than it was outside. So you would spend a lot of time outside, so that way you would be able to cool off and just enjoy the beauty of the garden that you had. Here in the rose garden, there actually used to be a sundial here in the center, but at one point in time it was taken out, and we actually don't know what happened to it. It's featured in different photos that we have, but ultimately it was taken out. And you see there's all these trellises around me in the rose garden. There actually used to be different types of climbing roses that were here, but because of the large trees that we have now and all the shade, they eventually died off. During this time, this area of the garden was very formal, but the tea house actually was a little less formal. It had a canvas roof to it and it didn't look as polished as the tea house that we have now does. And it was during this time that more outdoor activities were becoming more popular. So there was also a clay tennis court out here at this time, and then later it turned into a putting green. Now the change in the design happened around 1927, and this is the last period of design, which is what the garden closely represents now. This design was done by a very famous and well-known gardener named Louise Yeomans King, and she decided to make this a bit more of a naturalistic design. So there actually were chains in between all of these arbors in the rose garden that the History Museum abandoned when we got the donation of the land to us, because it wasn't really very conducive for public use. And also during this last period of design, the wellhead was added. And it was during this time that the gardens started to become a little bit more natural, maybe slightly more overgrowth than there was before during Alice Neal's design. So also during this time, the tea house was updated. So it included having electricity as well as adding furniture to the tea house. And this was kind of the last big change to the gardens. In the 1940s, that's when that putting green was added, because Susan Catherine, the youngest daughter, was a very avid golfer. And also later on during the 70s, that's when the Sundial was gone in the gardens, and the wellhead was here as opposed to in some previous photos that we have. And then the cutting garden and the cold frames were also abandoned at this time. And then since the Olivers were living here up through the 1980s, some changes occurred in the 70s where they started to have a little bit more overgrowth to the gardens as well as on the house. There was originally wire that ran up the house to encourage ivy to grow on it, but that was later abandoned when they learned that it could damage the masonry work. So the gardens are actually a very important part of the interpretation of Copshaholm, just because this is when we started to use outdoor spaces as we know them now. So the way that the garden looks now is as close as we can get it to what it looked like originally, and the whole reason for that is we have a whole group of garden volunteers that comes here every week and does all the planting and preparations every single year and makes the garden as beautiful as it is.